Here's a simple statement that I think anyone who's writing needs to remember. Your writing goals, your storytelling goals will determine how you write. If you take a survey of any different type of writing, if you go into generally anyone's bookshelf, if they are a reader of some sort, and you pick up any sort of book, you're going to find a lot of different styles of writing. And some of those books are going to be nonfiction, and some of those books are going to be fiction, and it makes sense that there are different styles in writing between fiction and nonfiction. Now, in some cases, we give a little bit more leeway to those nonfiction writers who aren't very good at writing, and I'm not dissing them as a whole. I think that it's important to put out nonfiction books, but it is often the case when I read a nonfiction book that is trying to relay information that the writing is dry. The writing isn't captivating. It doesn't draw you in, even though the content might be very interesting. So there is a difference between writing fiction and there is a difference between writing nonfiction. There's a difference between those two different genres. And there's also a difference between different genres within fiction itself. You write a romance in a way that is different than a sci-fi. You write a sci-fi in a way that is different than a Western, etc. You can break it down into any genre fiction you like, and then there are some people who don't like to be classified as genre fiction, and they say they are literary fiction, and they say, I write in the literary way, which is hard to define because it's not really a set way of writing. But at the same time, each way you write, each genre you're writing in doesn't have a set way of writing either. It just has specific ways that they feel, right? Each of these genres feel a specific way, and there are certain things you need to do to make that genre feel that specific way. But I think one thing important to remember is that all different types of writing or all different situations for writing are unique. Right? So if I am writing a book and I'm retelling an old fairy tale, right? If I'm retelling Snow White and I have a friend who is retelling Snow White as well, we are going to have a different take on that story. We are not going to have the same book. It's going to be the same story, but it is not going to be the same book, if that makes sense. It's not going to be the same thing. It's going to be a different feel. It's going to be a different writer. The reason why this happens is because we have different storytelling goals and we also have different writing goals, right? At the root, I do believe that the goal of your writing should be to communicate clearly. So I think that requires that we think as clearly as possible so we can communicate as clearly as possible. But at the root, I think you're trying to communicate clearly. And people take that, I think, in the wrong way, because when I talk about communicating clearly, I don't just talk about ideas, right? I don't just talk about logical arguments or anything like that. I'm also talking about experiences. I'm talking about the way people think. I'm talking about the emotion that goes along with a story, because stories are naturally emotional. Stories are tied up in emotion. You can't disconnect the emotion, in my opinion, from stories. But when you write, besides this idea of being as clear as possible in your writing, I think that there's also this idea of different goals you might have. Why are you writing this specific thing? What are you trying to reach? What goal are you trying to reach, right? And this can be on different levels. It can be on the writing itself, and it can be on the storytelling as well. And I would say that when you're writing a book, it's more likely, or when you're writing fiction, it's more likely that the story and the content of the story, because that's the most important thing, I would say that these things are going to dictate how you write more than other writing goals, right? You might have specific ways you write. You might have specific ways you communicate because you've been writing a certain amount of time, and that's just your natural way of doing things. But at the same time, I think that your storytelling goals are going to dictate how you write more in that way. They're going to be more influential. And I think you can get really complex with this and not in a way that is annoying, but in a way that is unique and interesting. For example, if you wanted to express this idea of calm in your writing, you could write in a specific way and use specific words and use different combinations of words to express this idea of calm. If you wanted to have a social drama, or you wanted to have a drama between two people, and you wanted this drama to be bubbling underneath the surface, and you wanted them to be at each other's throats, but they are never yelling, they're just talking, right? So you have two people who hate each other, but they are still just talking to one another, and you have to convey in this calm, subtle way how those two people are talking to one another and how they hate each other. And that creates tension within the story, and it creates a very interesting situation in the story. And you can do this with any other thing you do, right? If you are trying to write a war, well, if you do research on wars, you'll find out that most of the time people are really bored, and then there's these extreme instances of activity, right? There's extreme instances of activity, and this is where people are set on edge. So if you wanted to, and it'd be difficult if you've never gone through it, of course, but if you wanted to express that idea, you could actually make your writing reflect that idea. And to a certain degree, even if you're not trying to think on this level behind everything, you're going to be doing this anyway, right? If you are reaching toward a climax of a story, if you're trying to make that climax really interesting, or it's really engaging to the reader, they want to get to the end, you're going to be doing this in your writing, just because the words you use have emotions within them, right? And we naturally bring emotions into our words. When we are writing, we may not be the best at it, but at the same time, when we're pointing ourselves toward a climax of a story where everything's building up emotionally and everything's getting more tense, if that's the type of story you're trying to tell, if that is what you're trying to tell, you're going to be moving in that direction with your words as well. And I'm just encouraging you to realize why you're telling the story, right? What are your story goals? What are you trying to push toward? Because I think that's going to help you in the moment as you're writing. And this might not be something that you can apply immediately, if that makes sense. It might be the case that you're just not a good enough writer, and that's just part of life, and that's just part of learning. It might be the case that you need to take a bit more time and learn before you can actually think on multiple different levels as you're writing. And like I said, that just takes time to write. That just takes practice, and I believe you'll get to that point. But I think that when you do write, or when you plan, maybe it's better when you're doing your planning, what are your story goals? How can you integrate that into the writing itself, right? On different levels. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And if you look at really high level writers, you see this happening in their books. All right, so that's all I've got for you to say today. I will see you tomorrow. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support me, there's really one simple thing you can do. You can go to danielpoppie.com/newsletter and sign up for my newsletter. And when you sign up, you'll actually be able to get access to my publication roadmap. So that's everything I have planned for pretty much every project I have into the next decade. Again, that is danielpoppie.com/newsletter. You can also find the link below.